Let's jump right in. Today we're traveling back to the late 19th century to tear apart a pivotal moment in history that quite literally redrew the map of modern East Asia. Welcome to the Explainer. I'm talking about a truly stunning naval upset, the 1894 Battle of the Yalu River. You know, this was one of those rare moments where supposed technological superiority violently clashed with absolute institutional failure. And the shockwaves from this single afternoon of fighting, they're actually still dictating global security dynamics today.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We'll start with the clash of tigers, then look at why the Qing failed, unpack the Japanese juggernaut, explore the stolen victory, and finish up with echoes in modern geopolitics.
Part 1. The Clash of Tigers.
To really understand the stakes here, we have to look at the massive naval arms race of the late 19th century. Both Qing China and Meiji Japan were modernizing fast, right? They were determined to project power. Now, on paper, the Qing Chinese Navy absolutely dwarfed the Japanese Navy. They had these massive, heavily armored ironclads. But China's Navy had a fatal flaw. It was fractured into 4 regional fleets, and their loyalties were totally divided. So when it came time for the decisive battle, the Japanese Union Fleet, which was an entirely unified national force, actually showed up with an 11-10 ship advantage. Japan was the underdog with smaller, faster cruisers, but they brought their entire team to the fight.
There's this traditional expression, one mountain cannot hold 2 tigers. And it just perfectly captures the strategic reality in Northeast Asia right then. A major political crisis had erupted over in Korea, and both empires desperately needed sea control to land their armies on the mainland. Only one power was going to dominate. The Yellow Sea was the mountain, and these 2 rapidly modernizing navies, they were the tigers.
Part 2. Why the Qing failed. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the heavily favored tiger actually lost. You have to look past the thick armor of their ships and dig into the systemic rot that essentially doomed them before the first shot was even fired. The scale of the Qing Empire's dysfunction was, well, it was jaw-dropping. The ordnance supply officer for the Beiyang fleet was actually the fleet founder's son-in-law, and he was a world-class swindler. We are literally talking about artillery shells being filled with sand or black market cement instead of gunpowder. You had rival regional fleets refusing to send backup just out of sheer political spite. Ships were sailing into a war zone half-empty because corrupt officials were pocketing the salaries of phantom sailors. And the cherry on top? The fleet commander, Admiral Ding Ruchang, was a very gallant cavalry commander with absolutely zero naval experience.
Because of all this rampant embezzlement and complete lack of preparation, the 2 massive 7,000-ton Chinese ironclads, the absolute pride of the fleet, steamed into the decisive battle with a grand total of 3 shells for their main 10-inch guns. Just 3!
So with virtually no live-fire training, the Chinese tactics fell apart instantly. It went down like this. The Chinese panicked and opened fire way too early, at an extreme, totally ineffective range of 6,000 meters. The Japanese just waited. When the Japanese finally returned fire at 3,000 meters, they immediately scored a direct hit on the Chinese flagship's bridge. Admiral Ding was completely incapacitated right at the start, the signal mast was blown away, and with literally no way to communicate, the Chinese formation just dissolved into total chaos.
Part 3. The Japanese Juggernaut.
In stark contrast, for every single institutional failure suffered by the Qing, the Japanese demonstrated incredible institutional success. They didn't just buy shiny new weapons, they built an entire system to use them. The Japanese had embraced a strategic concept called gynécole. Developed by the French, this doctrine argued that smaller, much faster ships using quick-firing weapons could absolutely take down heavily armored behemoths. And Japan executed this flawlessly. They knew their lighter guns wouldn't pierce the Chinese ironclad's main armor, so what they do? They use their speed to outmaneuver them, relentlessly peppering the unarmored upper decks with rapid fire.
The combat data tells the whole story here. It proves that wars are won by the brains and training of the people behind the machinery. Because of their obsessive training at sea, the Japanese achieved a 15% hit rate compared to the Chinese 10%. But the real kicker? Their quick-firing guns allowed them to shoot 3 times faster. They were just vastly outperforming the Chinese in practical combat.
So Japan's victory wasn't a fluke, it was systemic. They had a highly unified national command. They had a professional officer corps trained at a dedicated naval academy since 1866. They concentrated on meritocracy and tight coordination, while China had basically just focused on buying the biggest, scariest-looking ships. That institutional discipline is exactly what sealed such a devastating, lopsided victory for Japan.
Part 4. The Stolen Victory.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because the diplomatic earthquake afterward is wild. After the battle in September 1894, China is forced to sign the Treaty of Shimonoseki the following April, officially ceding Taiwan and the highly strategic Liaodong Peninsula to Japan. But, almost immediately, 3 European powers step in. This is known as the Triple Intervention. They basically bullied Japan into giving Liaodong back to China. And then, the ultimate slap in the face. Just 3 years later, Russia hypocritically swoops right in and occupies that exact same peninsula for themselves.
So why did Europe intervene? Pure, unfiltered, self-interested geopolitics. Russia desperately wanted a warm water port in the east and absolutely did not want Japan controlling it. France chimed in purely to honor a brand new military alliance with Russia because they were terrified of being isolated in Europe. And Germany, they joined in hoping to distract Russia's military attention eastward, away from German borders, while also setting up an excuse to grab their own slice of China. None of them actually cared about China's sovereignty, they just wanted to cap Japan's rising power.
Stripped of their newly won territory on the mainland, Japan was forced to accept a massive financial payout instead, 450 million yen. And sure, while that was a staggering sum of money back then, the Japanese public was completely outraged. They felt robbed of the victory that their soldiers had literally bled for.
And this brilliantly illustrates the cultural shift that followed. This deep humiliation sparked a fierce nationalistic movement across Japan, encapsulated by the phrase Gushin Shotan, which translates to persevering through hardship for the sake of revenge. It ignited an ideology of intense heavy industrialization and a massive naval buildup. Japan fundamentally resolved that they would never, ever be bullied by Western powers.
Meanwhile, you have all these Western military observers who had been feverishly taking notes. The Battle of the Yalu was essentially a real-world beta test of modern, completely unproven naval weaponry. So what did the intelligence officers and military theorists of the West actually learn from this massive upset?
Well, ironically, many of them learned exactly the wrong lesson. The famous American naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan actually used the battle to justify his own pre-existing bias for giant battleships. Because the 2 massive Chinese ironclads technically didn't sink during the battle, even though their fleet was routed, Mahan cherry-picked that fact to validate his theories. He completely missed the real lesson, that institutional culture, rigorous training, and a unified command matter infinitely more than just having the thickest armor.
Part 5. Echoes in Modern Geopolitics. The historical through line from 1894 to the 20th century is incredibly direct. To protect themselves from being bullied by Europe again, Japan signs an alliance with Britain in 1902. Empowered by that shield, they launched the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 to take back that stolen territory from Russia. By 1910, Japan officially annexes Korea, going all in on imperialism. Meanwhile, over in China, the profound trauma and humiliation of the 1894 defeat shatters all remaining faith in the Qing dynasty, leading directly to its total collapse in the 1911 revolution.
And honestly, this isn't just dusty history. The catastrophic failure of the Biang fleet serves as a super potent origin story and a cautionary tale for modern China today. The sources we're explaining today note that the memory of this specific defeat is a massive driving narrative behind the current rapid expansion of the People's Liberation Army Navy. And it sits right at the core of the ongoing, incredibly complex geopolitical tensions surrounding Taiwan, an island that, remember, was originally ceded in the direct fallout of this very battle.
So the crucial point is how this history is actively wielded today. This phrase right here, "those who lag behind will be bullied," is a very common refrain found in modern Chinese historical messaging. It's a direct, visceral reference to the painful lessons learned from the corruption and weakness of 1894. It represents a fierce resolve to build a technocratic, highly modern military that avoids the institutional rot of the past. Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to end on. As military analysts today obsessively study current global conflicts to draw lessons about, say, drone warfare, logistics, or cyber attacks, we have to stop and ask, are we making the exact same cherry-picking mistakes that Alfred Thayer Mahan made back in 1894? When we study other people's wars, are we actually learning the cold, hard truth? Or are we just looking for evidence to confirm what we already want to believe? It's something every focused learner absolutely needs to keep in mind. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the Explainer, and keep questioning what you learn.